right, hello everyone, and welcome to my knit along with wool and fiber arts. I am demonstrating the blue caterpillar shawlette. This is part one. We'll see how far we get into it. My goal is to take about half an hour and start you off on your blue caterpillar shawlette journey. And then I will try to do at least one, if not two more events where we move into the next portions of the blue caterpillar, because there are some interesting pieces to learn. If you haven't yet purchased the pattern, this is what it looks like. Lovely little pattern here. It's 8 pages long, but you really only need the first 6 pages. One of the additional pages has more photos, and then the last page also has some of my other patterns on it, so you can check those out as well. So if you are interested in making the blue caterpillar shawlette, there are a few things that you need. They are all pretty much listed on the front of this page, but I do want to tell you about some optional switches. So I call for 1 kit of Mountain Colors Crazy Foot Perspectives, which is about 450 yards, 100% superwash merino in teals, but you don't have to use that. So I am actually using these 2 yarns. They aren't blue, they're green, because I had them and I thought they'd look nice together. This one's merino yak silk. This one is superwash and nylon. So they are 2 different yarn bases, but you can mix your yarn bases in this shawl. It's okay. Now, in addition to that, if you have leftovers or small balls of leftover yarn from other projects, you can use those. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. In fact, I give you full permission to use whatever yarn makes you happy. Now, if you'd like to make it all in one color, I recommend having at least 440 yards of yarn. I did have someone ask me if I used a full 450 yards. I don't think I used the full 450 yards because I had 5 different colors, and so as I was transitioning, I didn't always use the full skein. But just in case, it's always better to have as close to or a little more yardage than what is listed, because I don't want you to run out of yarn and your gauge may vary. Now, I did go ahead and I made a little sample swatch, just a tiny one, 20 stitches, and I don't know, 12 rows maybe, in this nice merino yak silk, the green. Because this was the one that I wanted to start with. So this is the colorway that I wanted to begin my shawl with. And I went ahead and just swatched it on my size 4 needles, which I have right here. And they're my signatures because that's what I wanted to use. Always remember to swatch on the needles you intend to use for your project. It's a very important thing to do. My gauge was pretty close. It was like 6.15 stitches per inch. By the time I divided my 20 stitches by my width, but and Ina stole my other tape measure that locks into place. That makes it harder to measure. Bless her little heart. Anyway, so she has a fascination with my tape measures. I'm gonna have to buy more of these. Anyhow, it is very important that you go ahead and just check your gauge, because if you don't have a ton of yardage or you aren't making this from leftovers, I don't want you to run out. That's the big thing here. I just don't want you to run out of yarn. I want you to have a fabulous time and not run out of yarn. So very important point there. This is a little bit smaller. This is a shawlette. It's not meant to be one of the giant shawls that I make, because I am known to make enormous ones. This is not one of those. This is a nice, moderately sized shawlette. It's supposed to just fit your shoulders, just be nice. One of my favorite ways to wear this one is to just put the point in the front, and I should say twist the 2 ends, spin it around, put the point in the front, so it kind of looks like a bandana. But anyway, so let's get started now on our caterpillar shawlette. The things that you need are your needles and your yarn, stitch markers, very important, tape measure if you haven't already measured your gauge. And if you haven't done a tab cast on before, this could be a little bit fun for you. Now I'm going to demonstrate with some double pointed needles. because I already just barely started the shawl so that I can take you to the next step and not have to completely finish my tab cast on. But I want to show you the basics of how to do the tab cast on. Now, as you go to cast on your first few stitches, you'll see it's a very small cast on. It's only 5 stitches. And I instruct you to use a stretchy cast on because I cheat. And this is my cheat. When I do tab cast ons, I don't do those, oh shoot, I just forgot the word. I don't do those cast ons, the crochet cast on, provisional cast ons, where I then have to rip it out. Now, if I was doing this for competition, I would absolutely do a provisional cast on for those 5 stitches and rip it out and pick those stitches up properly, but I cheat. I cheat a lot when I'm knitting because I can. It's a tiny shortcut and it saves me, you know, just the smallest amount of time and frustration, but it's worth it in the end for me. So I just cast on 5 stitches. You have to remember though to use a little bit of a stretchy cast on. Don't cast on really tight, because you have to pick up stitches along that cast on edge. So it's very important that whatever cast on you choose is stretchy enough to accommodate that. So let's start. And I'm just using a yarn, a leftover somewhere out of my stash to demonstrate with. So go ahead and cast on 5 stitches, and you'll want to use the yarn that you intend as the top, the base of your shawl. I instruct you to use your lightest yarn because in my kit, it went from lightest to darkest. But you can choose. You could go darkest to lightest. You could intermix your colors. You could stripe it. It's your shawl. Make it the way that you want it. Make it the way that you want it. Very important point there. So I have my 5 stitches. I've just cast them on. I just used a long tail. I don't have a really tight long tail cast on. If you are a tight knitter, you may want to cast on over 2 needles to do this so that you can ensure that you'll be able to pick up stitches along the edge. Now, all you're going to do is knit your 15 rows. I'm not actually going to knit 15 rows because I want this to go a little bit faster. But the important point here is that you will pick up 1 stitch for every garter row. So that's how we can tell how many stitches that we have, because we need 7 stitches from that. So we want 15 rows because we want to have 7 garter ridges worth of stitches to pick up. So that's the idea here. And if you get lost in your counting, just remember that for every 1 garter ridge, it's 2 rows. So 1 garter ridge, 2 rows. Alrighty. Oh, Kathy, you're going to make yours very spring-like? Nice. You can absolutely do whatever you want with your shawl. Just because I called it the Blue Caterpillar and I named it for a character in Alice in Wonderland doesn't mean that it has to be blue. I mean, mine's going to be green because that's what I chose. And it's okay to mix different fibers so long as you have approximately the same weight, because you do want to remember that when you're blocking, those fibers can act a little differently, so you want to make sure that you have similar weights so that they will block more like each other than not. Now, I wouldn't necessarily mix something like cotton with wool, although that might give a really interesting effect. No, I would not mix cotton with wool for this shawl because we do want to make sure that we have a lovely lacy effect. But you can use a merino yak silk. You could use, like I said, the superwash and nylon. You could use just merino and silk, BFL and silk. You could use some of your hand spun, just so long as they're approximately the same thickness. That's really the key here. Okay, so I have just a few garter stitch rows here. This will not be exactly what your tab cast on looks like, but I do want to show you how to do this. So all I have done is cast on 5 stitches, and I have just knit several rows, and I have knit 4, 6. I've knit 7 rows at this point. So just a few, about half of what you actually need. So you should be following your pattern at this point where it says to knit the 15 rows, and then you'll pick up your stitches. So what we do then is we knit those first 5 stitches. So I'm just going to knit those first 5 stitches. And now I'm going to flip the camera around so I can show you how to pick up stitches along the sides and put your stitch markers in. So hang on. All right. Let me get a little bit closer. Tip that down. All righty. Now then, here's my little tab cast on where I've just done my 5 little stitches. And I have knit like 7 rows. Remember, that's not the full amount for your tab cast on. And now what you're going to do is knit your 5 stitches. 3, 4, 5. Going to grab a stitch marker. I like these little guys. We keep these in shop because they're fabulous. Put your stitch marker on. Now use your opposite needle to pick up your stitches along the edge, just like this. Pretty much 1 stitch for every garter ridge. Okay, that one's being a little bit tricky. There we go. And now I like to knit through the back of these stitches because they're kind of oriented the wrong way. And if you don't, it twists them in a funny way. So this is one side, this is the next side. And then place your stitch marker again. And we'll have to pick up 5 stitches along this base because that's how many we cast on. So I just sort of wiggle. That's where my tail is. That's why it's nice and loose. 3, 4, and see if I can grab one more there. Hopefully. This is always the hardest one. It's getting just one little loop. Ha ha ha. I think I got it that time. That feels better. We're going to try it. It's a little tight still, but we're going to try it. Come on. There we go. And 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There we go. And that'll look a little funny because this isn't the full amount that we're supposed to cast on. But this is very similar to what yours should look like. It looks a little bit like a cup because you want to make sure that your tab cast on looks continuous. So I went ahead and started my shawl out of the green, and I made sure I had my stitch markers placed. This is what it will look like after you have all of your stitches picked up and you have your stitch markers in place right here. That's the actual start for the shawl. That's as far as I got right there. I just did the tab cast on and pick up and put my stitch markers in. All right, now let's keep going. So let me turn it around again. And I know, back and forth, back and forth. This is the hard part. Okay, so tab cast on, not that difficult. Kind of fun. Makes for a nice continuous line along the top of your shawl and helps to prevent a really distinct cast on area because, you know, it's hard to find the cast on because you've buried it in that tab. I love the tab cast on. I use it a lot when I'm designing because I love the continuity of it along that garter stitch edge. Now, once you have your tab cast on done and your stitch markers placed, then we move on to our setup chart. And I do always write my patterns with both the written and the charted form, so you can compare them if you'd like to learn how to read charts. Or if you are already familiar with charts, you can just go straight to the charts. I find charts much easier visually for me to understand how the stitches should interact and grow, so I find my mistakes a lot faster. But if you are a written kind of person, I made sure to include those as well. And yes, Kathy, there are different ways to do the pickup and knit. So you aren't necessarily wrong, you're just doing it a different way. So with some of the things that I do, like socks, I do make sure that I pick up and knit through the back of the loop because I'm trying to close it down and I want it to look twisted and closed. But Sometimes I don't knit through the back of the loop and twist the base. Sometimes I want to knit through the back to open it because the stitches are oriented the wrong way, like on my pickup on that tab cast on. So you aren't wrong. You are not wrong. It just happens that you're doing it a different way. All right, let's get back to the setup. So once you're ready to do the setup, you can choose whether you want to do the chart, and the setup chart is on page 5. So let's see if I can get that. Page 5 right there at the top. That is your setup chart. Or you can choose to do the written, totally your choice. Now, this particular shawl uses very simple stitches. We do yarn overs, slip, slip, knits, knit 2 togethers, slip 1, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over. Very, very common lace stitches. And there's even sections in here where all you're doing is increasing at the spine and the edges, and you just knit stockinette between those. Now, I have my pattern written so that you have 2 sections that you're working. So you always need to think about that, is that you have 2 sections that you're working in the shawl. So you will work that setup chart row twice because you're growing it on both sides. Just something to keep in mind. It is written in your pattern, but I always like to reiterate that when I'm teaching, well, live. So what you'll do is knit your 5 stitches. Make sure that you have placed your marker. Work row 1 of your chart. Make sure that you have your marker. Knit 1, because that 1 stitch will be for your center stitch that will always remain. So I always put a stitch marker on each side of my central stitch because I don't want to lose that spine stitch. I want to make sure that I always know where it is because it's a way for me to orient my stitches. If I make a mistake, I know that I should always have that 1 stitch in the center. So I make sure that I mark it, and I mark it very visibly. Sometimes I will use like little crystals. Can't see that. Little crystals like this. Sometimes I like locking stitch markers. This is just a plain locking stitch marker. This one works too. But I always like to put some kind of very visual stitch at my edges and at my center so that I know for sure where they are. And that's something that I do so I don't get lost in the pattern. Okay. Now we get into this. Actually, it's kind of boring from here on out because I'm just knitting things. But I'll at least get you started. So we knit the first 5 stitches, and then I am going to replace this edge stitch marker that I had, the little textured guy, with one of my little beaded drop guys because I want to know for sure that that is my edge. And then I'm going to work a yarn over, knit 3, work a yarn over, and again I'm going to use a little beaded drop stitch marker right there, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, 2, 3, and then again I'm going to replace my stitch marker because I was using the plain ones, and I want to mark those edge stitches so that I know where they are, and knit 5. Now it's also important to note that on my charts in particular, they only show the right side, the odd rows, because for all wrong side or even rows, you are going to knit the 5 edge stitches, purl all the way across, and then knit the last 5 stitches. So also important to keep that in mind. So on row 2, all I'm doing is knitting 5, purling to the last 5 stitches, and knitting 5 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we purl. Always make sure that you are slipping your markers as you come to them, and also make sure that, oh, I forgot to mark the other side of my, oh, that was bad. I didn't mark the other side of my center stitch. There. Now I did. Always got to keep that in mind. You want to know where that center stitch is, because if you have made a mistake, it's most likely that you have forgotten a yarn over, added a yarn over, or your yarn over has moved. So it skipped the stitch marker. Very important things to remember. All right, and now look, I have my pretty little stitch markers. They're all marking. Sorry, it just makes me really happy when I have my stitch markers in. All right, and then row 2 of our chart is very similar to row 1, where we're going to knit 5, and then yarn over, and then knit 5, yarn over, knit 1, because we'll always knit that center stitch on the right side rows, and purl it on the wrong side rows. So that's the important piece to remember there. 3, 4. Oh, and there, see, I forgot a stitch. So let me show you. I forgot the yarn over right here, because I should have 5 stitches and I only have 4. So what I'm going to do is pretend that I put it in, and I'm just going to open the 2 bars and pretend that this is my yarn over, and this was my purl stitch that should have gone here, and then fix it. And there, now it's all fixed. You never know. That's the thing about yarn overs, they're really easy to pick up. And now I can knit that stitch, make my yarn over and not forget it, and then knit my last 5 stitches. And again, on the back side, we need to remember that we are purling all of our center stitches. So we'll knit 5 stitches on each side, but we are going to purl all of the stitches that remain between them. So that's the key here for, I think, all of the wrong side rows throughout the entire piece, because we are making knitted lace, not lace knitting. And I do much more knitted lace than lace knitting. The difference being that I liked having the rest row, which makes it knitted lace, instead of having patterning on both rows, which makes it lace knitting. So I hope that makes sense. Does anyone have questions that I can answer as we get started? Do you need me to demonstrate stitches? Slip, slip, knits, knit 2 togethers, slip 1, pass, slip 1, knit 2 together, pass, slip, stitch over. Anybody? Raise his hand in the comments. If not, I'll assume that you can do those things. I'm always happy to demonstrate those. I do put videos up on our Facebook page, YouTube channel, our Instagram channel, and our TikTok channel, and I do teach all of these decrease stitches in little short videos, so you can find those there as well. Anybody? Okay, well, how long have we been here? Oof, long enough. So if nobody has questions, I'm just going to remind you that on your right side rows, pay attention to your stitch markers. And make sure that you have your yarn overs that are increasing next to the spine and next to your edge stitches, because we are making a triangular shawl from the top down. Very important. On the wrong side rows, remember that you're knitting the first 5, you're purling until you get to the last 5, and then you're knitting those stitches. And you're doing that throughout the entire shawl. So you get a nice little break on the back side. You will switch colors if you want to. You don't have to, but you can switch colors according to the pattern. After chart 1, that's where you'll get into a stripe section. And yeah, if you run into any problems, you can, of course, contact me. I will set up another event for next Tuesday. So we'll do part 2. And hopefully I will have made it into chart 3. That's my goal. I may only make it through chart 2. We'll find out. Chart 2 is the big one. So anyway, hopefully I'll be ready for chart 3. Somehow I doubt it. We'll just say, okay, I'll revise it. I'll be ready for chart 2, hopefully, by next week. And we will have put in our stripe sections. So totally your choice, again, on the yarns and the colors and what you do with this. This particular shawl, because it does use 5 different colors if you'd like, it's a great way to use up small bits of yarn. Totally your choice. If you don't want to do that, you can make it all one color. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. I'm making mine in 2 colors and 2 different yarn bases. So whatever makes you happy is how you should make this shawl. And if you get into it and you find that you want to change it, I don't care. Change it. Make it yours. Alrighty, I will see you all next week. Your goal is to have worked at least through the setup chart and chart 1 and be ready to transition into the stripe, because I want to talk about how to transition from a stripe into a chart. But it's kind of the same thing. It's not hard, it's just something to think about. Remember to watch your yarn overs, slip your stitch markers, and make sure that you have marked your repeats. Very important, because it's just one of those things in lace that I always do so that I can count more easily. When you get into chart 1, I should also point out that you may find right up here, this guy, this slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over, you might have to steal stitches, which means that you might have to use a stitch from either the right or left side of your stitch marker and then move your stitch marker. It's okay, don't panic when that happens. That's a normal thing with lace knitting, that you would borrow stitches. So don't panic if that has to happen. It'll have to happen. Don't panic when that has to happen, okay? It's all right. Everything's fine. If you have trouble, remember you can contact me through Kelly with an I @ blacksheep@torenco.com. You can also get me through Kelly at kellyslackdesigns.com, and you can contact me through Facebook as well if you need some help with this. So I will see you all next week. We will be moving from stripe 1 into chart 2. Cross your fingers, hopefully. That's my goal, to get that done, but I have lots of other things going on. I made a cake today. I'm like trying to get my duckies incubated, and then I'm chasing my adult ducks across my highway because they decided that the grass looks greener on the other side of the highway, even though we have 3 acres and a pond. Go figure. So anyway, cross your fingers that I will be ready for chart 2 next week. All right, I will see you then. Happy knitting. Remember, contact me if you have trouble or have questions. And don't forget to check out my YouTube channel, our blacksheepfiberemporium.com page, because I do put tutorials up there. We have a whole page of help, free patterns and tutorials, so that if you need a little help, I'm there in a video talking you through it. So I'll see you guys next week. Bye.